Greetings and welcome to Common Ground here on 100.7 WZLX. My name is Kimberly. This week's edition of Common Ground is a show that is of great importance, in my opinion. I'm going to be interviewing Dan Strollo, who is the president of In Control Crash Prevention Training. I want to give their website right off the bat, which is driveincontrol.com. In Control offers the nation's first state-certified crash prevention training to drivers of all ages. And it's a closed course with hands-on education that was adapted from existing law enforcement training in the United States as well as European instruction. And In Control has been in operation in Massachusetts for about 5 years now, something that I learned about several years ago and have been looking forward to going through the training myself, and I did, and it was fabulous, and I recommend it highly, highly, highly for particularly teenage new drivers, and even if you are an elderly driver and you want to see how savvy you are, people of all ages, I couldn't recommend it more highly. I'd also like to thank Safety Insurance for sponsoring In Control on WZLX. Dan, welcome to Common Ground. How are you?
I am well. Thank you, Kimberly.
I am very well also. And I'm so pleased to have now finally gone through the In Control Crash Prevention Training Program because I can really speak to it very well. So you're the expert, but now I get to give my take on it too. So I'm looking forward to doing this.
Well, we were happy to have you, and it's one of those things where once you've completed the course, you really become a champion for what we do.
Well, I have been since I learned about it initially going back a few years ago, and now I really know what I'm talking about. So
that is good.
I did before, but now I can even speak to it in more detail.
And things have changed a little bit over the last few years. When you had first heard about it, we were working with the Massachusetts Auto Dealers Charitable Foundation, so a lot of people knew us as Skid School. But we've started using the term crash prevention training just because it does a better job of explaining what we do.
Absolutely. So I've given a little bit of an overview here, but why don't you just give the history and why this training is important, et cetera, and then I have lots of details to get into.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's important to start back in the 70s, really, and look at the United States. It was the safest place in the world to drive. All right, death rate per capita for car crashes was the lowest on Earth, basically. And at that same time, Germany, for example, was the least safe place to drive. And the Germans looked at what was going on in their environment and in their communities and basically as a society and decided that they were going to focus on education to improve their death rate for crashes. As a result, if you want to get your license in Germany, you're probably going to spend close to $5,000 US now. And you're going to spend, 30-plus hours on the road with an instructor. You're going to spend more than a dozen hours in a closed course hands-on program similar to what we do, but, more than twice the time that we spend with our students. And when the license exam takes place, the rulers come out. It can be over an hour long, and it's a much more serious approach to driving. So fast forward to 2011, the United States is now in 42nd place out of 48 countries. That's how bad our death rate for crashes has gotten.
Wow.
And, our main issue is as a society, we're not taking driving nearly as seriously. Our license test is 15 minutes maximum here in Massachusetts, and that's a stretch to see some of these tests going 15 minutes. We are probably one of the leaders in the amount of time that they spend with an instructor, but that doesn't mean that it translates into making us better drivers. And as a society, again, not taking it seriously, we have this big problem with text messaging and driving. And in Germany, if you're eating behind the wheel, you're going to get a ticket. And a lot of European countries are further advanced with their texting and their cell phone use because the way the system is over there, and they don't have nearly the problem with people texting and driving because they appreciate how dangerous it is in the first place. So that's kind of the incubator for where In Control came in. We looked at these European programs and the impact it had on driving there and said there's something that can be done locally. And there's been a couple of programs that travel the country that don't necessarily take it the same speed basically is the issue with us. They don't necessarily do as impactful a program as we do. But they've been out there for a few years, and what we had developed was a program that really speaks to the dangers of driving and tries to train both new drivers and old drivers. We've had a 94-year-old driver go through our program and pass, and we want to work with drivers of all ages to make them better drivers. And the bottom line is, unless you've grown up in some of these European communities, you haven't had this kind of training to be able to drive.
I'm really curious, what happened from the 70s to now? What was the difference? Why were we better then than now?
Well, it's a combination of our focus was on technology. So, things like ABS brakes, great technological advance. Too bad we never told anybody how to use them.
Yeah.
So, we've done a lot in the world of technology. Sometimes I think there's, you can buy certain Mercedes, and there's other vehicles coming out with this now, that if you get into a panic stop situation and slam on the brakes, it decides that you meant to stop the car. And now that you've been through our program, I'll briefly explain to your listeners, the very first drill we do with all of our students is a highway speed panic stop. You have to slam on the brakes at a highway speed. And many students basically freak out. The experience of having the seatbelt lock up, the G-forces involved, the pedal pulsating, the wheel vibrating, even the noises the car makes are so intimidating. They freak out, they take their foot off the brake, which is really counterproductive when we want you to stop. So what happens is you see the car kind of dive down from the outside, and then it bounces up again, and we set up a wall of cones that they bump into, but in real life they might run into the car in front of them or whatever they were trying to avoid. These higher-end Mercedes and some other vehicles are set up so that if they believe you meant to stop, they will slam on the brake for you. They'll feel you apply the brake, and then they'll say, oh, he probably meant to stop the car completely, even if you take your foot off the brake. Well, what happens if you're looking in your rearview mirror and you're a well-qualified defensive driver and you see a truck barreling down on you and you want to move out of the way? Your brake's on now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain things that, if we could learn how to control the car, if we could understand driving and be more drivers as opposed to passengers. If you're sitting behind that wheel, you really need to be responsible, paying attention. And there's a lot of things now that manufacturers are doing to, you can update your Facebook page in some cars now. There's certain things that it's just, hey, we're doing a lot more than just driving. We should be just focused on driving.
Excellent. Thank you. Talking with Dan Strollo on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX, and we're speaking about in-control crash prevention training. And I'm going to say the website over and over again, driveincontrol.com. Please go there and check it out. I'm a very defensive driver. People think I drive like a little old lady. I pull over when somebody's too close behind me. I'm not in that much of a hurry. That's the kind of a driver I am, but I think that that's a little bit rare, especially in New England. However, I learned to drive in a car that didn't have anti-lock brakes. I've probably had anti-lock brakes for, maybe 20 years now, and I didn't know how to use them correctly. Yeah. That was worth every minute just for that, and that blows me away. I'm a pretty intelligent, educated woman, and I even had conversations with a couple people about it, and we don't know how to use those anti-lock brakes correctly, so I'd like you to explain it right now for us.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you what, I do speeches all over Massachusetts, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen people in the audience realize that a crash they had was because they didn't know how to work their ABS brakes, as I was explaining them. So first and foremost, ABS, or anti-lock brakes, they, in my opinion, are one of the best things to be invented and added to vehicles since the steering wheel. And a lot of people don't know how they work, as you described.
Yep. And
they really, some folks don't like them. I think they would be on every car, and they're not now. But I think the reason they're not is that we sold a lot of cars. Your dealership is not responsible to train you how to drive the vehicle, nor do they mention, hey, you've got ABS brakes on this car. And we've had people return their vehicles to bring them back to service, or just, return the car altogether because they thought something was wrong with it. So the function that ABS brakes has is that it pulsates the braking system so that your wheels don't lock up. So back when I got my license, if I was traveling at 40 miles an hour and slammed on my brakes, all four wheels are going to lock up. And if I turn the wheel as I do this to avoid whatever I was probably trying to stop for in the first place, I keep sliding in the direction that I was traveling. With an ABS system, with ABS brakes, your pedals pulsate. They don't ever allow the wheels to lock up completely. And when you turn the wheel, you can actually steer.
Right.
Tremendously powerful to avoid a crash. Now, there are still plenty of vehicles without ABS brakes today. So if you have a standard braking system, back in the day, everybody always called it pumping the brakes. We refer to it as threshold braking because we really want to discourage you from wildly pumping the brakes if you need to stop. But the idea is you have to manually depress that brake pedal as hard as you can, and as you feel the wheels start to lock up, come off with your pressure, and then depress the brake pedal again. In a panic situation, that's a lot to ask of a driver. It's particularly new drivers. We're always cautioning parents that they really need to get a car with ABS brakes. Put all the things that you possibly can in favor of your child being safe. But the reality is, in a panic situation, it's so much easier just to push that pedal as hard as you possibly can and then steer to safety versus pray that you can handle threshold braking appropriately so you don't start to have your wheels lock up and be unable to steer in the first place.
So what is the percentage of cars on the road that do have and don't have anti-lock brakes? Do you know?
You know, it's interesting. Today, there's a good probably 20%. I mean, you got to think about if you're a car rental company, you can save some money by not getting ABS brakes. There's plenty of opportunities to reduce your cost of a vehicle by not getting ABS brakes. So the newer vehicles sold, there's still probably about 20, I think is the latest stat I'd seen, 20% of these. The thing we have to think about is the average age of a consumer's car just a few years ago was 8 years. And with the economy the way it is now, my suspicion is it's probably getting closer to 10 years. And so, there's still a lot of vehicles out there without ABS brakes. And again, I always caution parents. In my household, I say this now, but my oldest is 8. My intention is for my kids to drive the best car in the house because I want them to have all the gadgets to keep them as safe as possible. And the hand-me-down thing makes a ton of sense, except for just make sure you've got all the safety possibility. The things that ABS brakes is a big item to have with new drivers. And so with a lot of these older cars, I wouldn't be surprised if it's 50-50 out there right now.
Okay. So one of the things I just want to state for those that are like me that have anti-lock brakes and didn't know that they didn't know how to use them. I mean, I know what they feel like in snow, and
Sure.
I use them there, but I haven't really used them much on dry land, so there's a big difference there. Anyway, I just want to make the statement that you actually put your pedal to the brake and push it down, and you can steer where you want to steer.
Absolutely.
And the car goes where you want it to go, and keep that brake down, and that was an amazing experience.
What we do, and first and foremost for all your listeners, when you get it behind the wheel of your car, you may not know if you have anti-lock brakes. When you turn the key, you're going to see ABS in red, or you'll see the word anti, A-N-T-I. That's the legal way to tell you that you have ABS brakes. If that light stays on after you start the car, then you've got a problem and you need to go see a mechanic to have it looked at. But if you see those things, you have anti-lock brakes. If you don't see that when you start the car, the vehicle does not have anti-lock brakes. And again, if you're traveling, you're at an airport, there's a good chance you may pick up a vehicle that doesn't have anti-lock brakes. And when you go to apply the brakes in an emergency situation, you're absolutely right. You can steer yourself to safety, and that's the real key element, is you can push that pedal as hard as you can. We've had, the big football playing kids worried they're going to break the pedal off, and it's not going to happen. All the might you can put into it will help you, because then you're going to be able to steer at the same time.
All right, excellent, thank you. Again, I'm talking with Dan Strollo, president of In Control Crash Prevention Training. The website is driveincontrol.com, and he's joined me here on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. All right, now this was pretty good. They give you a quiz to start off the program, and then you take it again after the class. And I got the answer right. However, it was interesting to get the details on this. The question is, true or false, four-wheel drive vehicles are safer in snow and rain? And the answer is false. I got it right, but I'd love you to explain it, because for those who think they are safer, I'd like them to know why it's false.
Absolutely. It's funny, the thing with four-wheel drive, we work a lot with companies, and oftentimes I laugh at some of these companies that get their executives four-wheel drive vehicles with the expectation that they'll be able to get in during a snowstorm and they'll be safer. And first and foremost, my joke is most of these executives are the last people who are driving into work during the snowstorm. But beyond that, four-wheel drive doesn't really provide the same benefits that people think it's going to provide them. In the example of snow, every year we get something going on with the local TV crews where during one of the snowstorms we will take a four-wheel drive vehicle, usually some sort of SUV, a Toyota, and we use our vehicles for this training, but I should mention that we go through tires every 7 days. So thank you very much to Sullivan Tire, who's been providing us tires for years now. We use one of our Toyotas with all-weather tires and then another one of our Toyotas with snow tires. And the four-wheel drive vehicle and the vehicle with snow tires can accelerate out of the snow just about at the same speed. But once we get into things like a slalom, for example, the vehicle with snow tires can go twice as fast as the other two vehicles. And in the braking drill, they can stop in half the distance. The sedans are lighter. The snow tires themselves give them some adhesion to the road that you just don't get with the SUV with its normal all-weather tires. So what happens is people get overconfident. You can accelerate. You can get going pretty fast, but your braking is dramatically impacted as well as your steering capabilities. And the steering issue is exacerbated even further on just regular, driving around the town normally. To keep control of an SUV is a lot more difficult. They tend to be top-heavy, and if you get yourself in an emergency situation, it's really easy to throw off the balance of that vehicle and lose control of your steering. And that's why you often see SUVs roll over. There's things with the suspension where they have greater travel with the suspension, and the vehicles can flip over at speeds 35 miles an hour. And ultimately, because they're considered SUVs, they're held to a different safety standard than a sedan, and they can be a lot more dangerous inside. The metal on the roof is thinner, and there's just reasons why you can really get hurt driving an SUV, whereas a sedan, you most likely wouldn't have rolled over in that same situation, and if you did, you would have had more protection.
So one thing is that just because you have four-wheel drive doesn't make ice any safer. However, that was one of the things that I did learn also is I remember back when I was younger, people used to switch to their winter tires, their snow tires, and their summer tires. And now I know and considering that I'm going to do that because I've been an all-weather tire person thinking that was more economical. You can do a little brief description of the difference between the tires. That would be great.
Sure. And really, tires have changed dramatically in the last couple decades. There's a chemical compound now that snow tires are made up of that basically if you drove that vehicle around with snow tires in the summer, you'd leave tracks. It's a much softer compound. And as a result, it grabs ice and snow, and it gives you much greater control and traction. The vehicle tires now that are considered all-weather, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's really easy for the manufacturer to sell the same cars that go to Florida and Texas and New England and put the same tires on them. But the reality is, it's a night and day difference on your traction. And what we recommend to people is get rims and tires, do it once. You're going to buy a car and hopefully own it for quite some time. Keep those tires and rims in your garage, and sometime in November, and then, by the time April rolls around, you can switch back to your summer tires. And if you got a vehicle that had some nice-looking rims, you're going to not do as much damage to the rims driving around in the salt weather and those sorts of things. So it can be kind of economical in the end. But more importantly, we have these days, there's a couple of years back we had that one storm where everybody got let out of work at the same time and cars were smashed up and stuck everywhere. And if only a small percentage of those folks had snow tires, we probably wouldn't have had nearly the problems we had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really important thing to learn. Thank you, Dan. Dan Strollo from In Control Crash Prevention Training. Again, the website driveincontrol.com. And he's joined me here on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. Just real quickly, the concept of an SUV being safer, you kind of mentioned that, but that's not necessarily true either.
Correct. The SUVs the bottom line with them is they're much easier to lose control of, and they are held to a different safety standard than a sedan would be held to. So now there's some high-end SUVs. I don't want to BMW and some other Volvo, those folks make some SUVs that have some extra stabilization as well as things on the roof to keep you safe and panels to make sure that if you do roll over, you're protected. But the vast majority of SUVs out there are held to a different safety standard, and if you do get yourself into trouble, and there were a string of rollovers on the South Shore where kids got crushed in Jeeps and Ford Explorers, and they really weren't going that fast. We usually tend to assume with young drivers speed was involved, and that's not always the case. And in a couple of cases, these kids were killed at 35 miles an hour where the vehicle rolled over and just crushed with them inside.
All right. And here's another one that I didn't know. I got this one wrong on the test at the beginning was seatbelts can prevent crashes. The answer is true, and I thought that they helped you stay protected in the car, but they actually prevent crashes, and you can explain that one for us.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I find so interesting is we'll talk to teens, adults, just in general, people who don't wear their seatbelt. And you'd be surprised how many folks will admit that. The percentages of people wearing their seatbelts is in the, 87% rate, I think, here in Massachusetts. So there's a good chunk of people out there who don't believe in them. And when you ask them why they don't wear a seatbelt, universally they will tell you they don't expect to crash, which particularly with teens, that invincibility factor, we're not totally surprised by it. And if you don't believe you're going to crash, what benefit does a seatbelt have? The reality is we encourage seatbelt use so that you can stay in control of the vehicle. You experienced in going through the program, we go through a slalom course, and at just speeds of 30, 35 miles an hour, you're bouncing around in that car pretty good. And if you get yourself into a scenario where you need to make a quick turn to avoid something and you don't have your seatbelt on, you can very easily find yourself in the passenger seat. And I'm not talking about a bench seat car. If you have two bucket seats up front, you can bounce over the middle and end up in the passenger seat, and then no one's driving. So it's really important to have that seatbelt on to keep you in control of the vehicle so that you can stay behind the wheel. And it's equally as important for your passengers to have that seatbelt on so that they don't bump into you while you're trying to take control of the car.
Yeah, they also showed us a pretty gruesome
Yeah.
real video of someone who didn't have their seatbelt on, and shows that he fell asleep and bumped into a guardrail, and then that's when everything started to happen. And if he'd had a seatbelt on, he probably could have regained control.
Yep.
Because he was in the seat.
That's exactly it. It's amazing how often these where people really get injured, it was something as simple as if they had had their seatbelt on. And so, again, we look at the seatbelt as, I believe there's truth that it will keep you from getting harmed in a crash, but if it can keep you out of that crash in the first place, you stand to save a lot of money and a lot of time and aggravation and hopefully keep yourself safe.
Yeah, because ultimately if you turn really quickly and you lose your foot off the brake and you can't reach it because you're sliding all over the place, that is definitely the seatbelt preventing a crash.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, at this point, we're going to take a quick break, and I've actually left what I consider to be one of the most important things that I have some statistics about. Is I'm going to throw out this statistic that 76% of crashes, particularly for new drivers, they get into them due to tailgating. So we're going to get into that in detail after we take the break. And real quickly before we do take a break, again, Dan Strollo is here with me. He's the president of In Control Crash Prevention Training. The website, please go check it out, is driveincontrol.com. A big thank you to Safety Insurance for sponsoring them here on WZLX. My name is Kimberly, and if you'd like to get in contact with me, my email address is commonground@wzlx.com. If you'd like a copy of this interview or additional information, please do get in contact with me again, commonground@wzlx.com. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with part 2 of the In Control interview with Dan Strollo right here on 100.7 WZLX. Welcome back to Common Ground here on 100.7 WZLX. My name is Kimberly, and I'm getting into part 2 of an interview with Dan Strollo, who is the president of In Control Crash Prevention Training. Their website is driveincontrol.com. A big thank you to Safety Insurance for sponsoring them on WZLX. And a big thank you for Dan for taking the time to talk with me about this important, in my opinion, training program that I recommend to people of all ages. So, Dan, oh boy, do I not like tailgaters. And my children think I'm kind of crazy, but I've been doing this for years. Years ago, I used to flash on my brakes if somebody was too close to me. Then over the years, things have changed, and I'm a little concerned about road rage and somebody getting mad at me. So nobody taught me this. I kind of figured it out for myself. I have been pulling over and letting people pass me for years. And I think that I do it more often now than I used to. And I understand that that is good, and I learned something about if I'm stuck and I can't pull over. The concept of tailgating, you do a great demonstration, and so again I want to give that statistic that 76% of car crashes, particularly with new drivers, they get into them due to tailgating. Your turn.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I want to applaud you for using the term crashes, and I think you may have picked this up from the class, but you may do it on your own. You hear a lot of people refer to these as accidents, and the vast majority, we're talking over 90% of crashes are avoidable. So when you use the term accident, it really gives people an out, like, oh, there's nothing I could have done. But in a lot of cases, following too closely is what the problem was. They were tailgating, and as a result, couldn't stop quickly enough. So Massachusetts, number one in the U.S. for tailgating crashes, for rear-end collisions, which is, if we want to pat ourselves on the back for that. And your listeners who are on the roads right now and can, realize that what we train is something called the 3-second rule. We want the vehicle that you're behind, we want that vehicle to pass some inanimate object. You can pick a sign, whatever it is. When they pass that object, you count 3 seconds, and then you pass that object. And when that enables you to do is put enough distance between you and that vehicle so that if they should stop suddenly, you have time to both react and apply the brakes as well as actually stop. In inclement weather, it doesn't hurt to give yourself a little bit more space. You've probably got a few people out there concerned that if they give that much space, they're never going to get anywhere, and that's not particularly true. I drive that way all the time, and I'm frequently driving through Boston and going to our different sites and meeting in different towns, and I've always made it to where I was trying to go. It's tailgating doesn't get you anywhere faster. It just puts you in more danger. The reality with all of this is we as evidence of being on the roads, we see a lot of people driving way too closely. And the reason why they don't always crash all the time is some of it's luck. I mean, a lot of us are scanning the horizon and we see brake lights up ahead and we're doing the right thing and we're slowing down. But the reality is that anything closer than 3 seconds, you don't have the time to react and stop. So in our course, we set up a scenario, and we ask people what the safe following distance is at about 50 miles an hour. And there's an old adage out there that never worked, but a lot of people believe that you need to be 1 car length for every 10 miles per hour that you're driving. And that actually doesn't work. And maybe at 20 miles an hour, 2 car lengths is enough, but it depends what you're driving for sure. But at 50 miles an hour, 5 car lengths is nowhere near enough because it takes exponentially further for your vehicle to stop as you go faster. So when we tell everybody we're going about 50 and we're going to test this theory, we usually get that 5 car lengths type of answer, and we tie off a cone to the back of one of our cars, and we end up dragging it down either the runway or the big open area that we're doing our training at. And we get our students to chase that vehicle and chase the cone. And we call that vehicle the rabbit vehicle, and they're basically chasing the cone down the runway, trying to keep the front of their car at that cone. And we tell them that the vehicle in front is going to slam on its brakes at any time. The brake lights are going to come on, and at that point you need to slam on your brakes. Now, keep in mind, if you're trying to visualize this, we don't actually have our students chasing behind our car. We don't have an unlimited supply of Toyota Camrys. So we offset the vehicles. They're a good 50 feet off to the right and left, and we have our instructors in there to help take over if there's any problems. And what we do is we tell everybody we're going to grade them. If they can stop before the back of the vehicle, they pass the drill. If they stop right at the bumper of the rabbit vehicle, it's a fender bender, so we can get the Boston accent out there. Mm-hmm. If they get anywhere beyond that, fender or bumper, and up to about halfway of the vehicle, that's an ambulance ride, and anything beyond halfway is a hearse ride. And as you probably saw, we average about 70% hearse rides and 30% ambulance rides. It's just not possible to stop under those circumstances. And so you really have to give yourself at least that 3-second barrier between you and the vehicle in front of you.
Yes, I was also taught the 1 car length, but I have to say that Massachusetts drivers, I don't know how many of them were even taught that.
No. So. And I do. Again, I speak at a lot of different functions about driving safety, and a lot of times I have people challenge that particular concept, just saying, well, how would I ever get anywhere, or people are going to cut me off, and it's true. You're going to get a few people. You leave enough space in there that as I go somewhere, I might get in a 10-mile, 20-mile drive, I'll get 2 or 3 people who will pull in front of me, and maybe more under traffic situations. But it's not such that I don't get to arrive at my eventual destination. And we really do climb on top of the vehicle in front of us. I mean, for some reason, we're drafting them or something. I'm not sure why we believe it's so important to drive so closely. But it's the most dangerous thing we do as drivers in Massachusetts.
Right, and that's what I said. I don't like driving in those situations, and I will guarantee you that I get to where I'm going also, and I leave that distance between me and the car in front of me all the time, and I've always made it to my destination, so I'll just guarantee
and you bring
that.
up a good point too. Your kids might, give you a hard time if you pull over and for some reason we get into these relationships with other vehicles on the road, and we feel like, they won if they're tailgating and we let them go by us, and the reality is, it's equally as important that we get to where we want to go safely. And if you can move over and let them pass you, or, again, it's tapping the brakes, like you said, is just not, we don't want to get into that relationship. We don't want to, we probably told the story in our class about the deacon who took out a crossbow and got into a altercation and ended up killing somebody on 93, probably 7 or 8 years ago. These are just situations where people get really wrapped up in the relationship of other drivers out there, and it really is in your best interest to just keep to yourself and be a courteous driver and make it to your destination safely.
Essentially, you want to keep your distance. I mean, that's how to be a defensive driver, but you also want them to know that you're there.
Sure.
So I do my best to keep my distance. Now, this was something that I learned because when I'm on the highway and I happen to be maybe on a 3-lane highway and I'm in the middle lane and I can't get over and I can't get out of someone's way, I get very anxious in that situation. But this is one of the things I learned, is that as long as I give a good distance between me and the car in front of me, even if the car behind me is really close, I could prevent an accident for both of us by keeping that distance.
Correct. You're not going to get into a situation where you need to overcompensate, and you do still, if somebody's really on top of you and you get into an emergency situation, they may not be able to stop. But you also mentioned you're going to be in the middle lane. Too many drivers, as soon as they see themselves on the highway, scoot way over to the far left lane, or a lot of folks will travel at speed limit or slightly above the speed limit in the right lane. But really, that 3-lane highway, that middle lane is your travel lane, and if you can stay in that lane till you get to your exit area, you're going to do a lot of people favors. In traffic situations, certainly not realistic, but in everyday driving, there's plenty of space there.
All right. Again, I'm talking with Dan Strollo. He's the president of In Control Crash Prevention Training, and the website is driveincontrol.com. He's joined me here on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. As far as tailgating, is there anything else that you would like to add to that I've missed?
No, I think you did a good job. Again, the important thing is to recognize the space that is necessary to stop the vehicle, and anything can happen. Probably the biggest piece of feedback we get from graduates of our program, after they've gone through a panic stop at highway speeds and we've really kind of shown them the light on tailgating. I mean, it's really difficult to tailgate again. And probably the biggest complaint we get from parents who send their kids, we try to get parents to go with their teens through our program, and when they just send their teen and the teen comes out of the program, we create some of the world's worst backseat drivers because they are never allowed to let their parents tailgate again. That's part of the deal. And so people will recognize how important it is to have that space. And then if you are being tailgated, like we said, try not to get into a relationship with them, pull over. There's been some studies that suggest if there's not room to pull over and you at least kind of stay to the right side of your lane, the people tend to recognize that you're acknowledging that they're, a little more hostile, but not starting with them, basically. But in general, get out of their way, let them get themselves in trouble. And I can tell you, I have been tailgated, particularly in inclement weather, and moved over and then gotten further down the road and had to pull over and call an ambulance for somebody who crashed. Mm-hmm. So I don't wish that upon those folks, but let them deal with the ramifications of how they're driving.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I wanted to mention a few statistics. I mentioned the one about 76% of crashes for new drivers. I'm going to keep saying that one. Get into accidents due to tailgating. And here was another question that was on the quiz. Drunk driving is the cause of most serious accidents among new drivers. That is false. And so I would like you to kind of give the overall statistics about new drivers that have taken your program versus those that have not.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I don't want to downplay the dangers of drinking, drugs, anything that's going to impact. You'd be surprised how impactful allergy medications are. We've done some things with some of the local TV stations where had students go through our program, take their allergy medication, then try to go through it, and they couldn't pass the second time. So, when that medication says do not operate heavy machinery, a vehicle is extremely heavy machinery. So that's one of those things you want to be conscious of. But new drivers get it. They seem to be, I mean, the crash rate for 16 and 17-year-olds that involve alcohol is something around 10% nationally. And that sounds horrific, and I still, that's why I'm saying I don't want to downplay it, because it's still a bad number. But in the 25 and older, it's about 45% of crashes. So this is an important thing to recognize, that as adults we really need to understand how much of an impact alcohol has on our ability to control. Statistics in general for teens, the one that scares me the most is, while car crashes is the number one unnatural cause of death in the United States, period. If you're under the age of 45, it's the number one cause of death. But if you're a teen, your chance, your death rate for car crashes is so great that if you add up the 2nd through 10th causes of death for teens, it barely approximates the number of kids who lose in car crashes. And these kids literally are crashing at a rate where in the first 2 years, it's well over half. So, I'll have parents in a room and I'll talk to them, and how many of them have, their teens have had their license for a year, okay, how many of them have crashed? And you'll see 60, 70% of the hands stay up in the room, and it's just unbelievable. And so it really doesn't have to be that way. There are a lot of things out there. What I will say about our program is we've had a couple different research studies that have shown a 70% reduction in crashes for new drivers. We've worked with existing 25 and older drivers through companies that are just couriers doing driving, and had 60% reductions in their crashes. The reality is, if you've never had this training, which is 99.9% of U.S. drivers, you gain so much from it that it changes the way you drive. Very rarely do we have somebody go through the program who doesn't tell us that it completely changed their attitude and a lot of their skills. They find themselves, and we refer to them as instinctual reactions, the concept that if you slam on the brakes to avoid a crash and you have ABS brakes and you now know how they're going to feel, you get yourself into an emergency situation and you had to do it. You may have hit the wall of cones in our class, but in real life you're able to stop and avoid getting seriously hurt.
I had that statistic about tailgating being one of the reasons for teenage new driver crashes. What are some of the other things?
Distractions is a big issue. Certainly cell phone use is a problem. We've just had some new legislation in Massachusetts, and it centers around text messaging and talking on the cell phone. And it's important for people to understand, talking, even if with a hands-free kit, the part of your brain that is focusing on really having that conversation is the same part of your brain that needs to be paying attention to the road and keeping you out of trouble. So if you really should try to avoid talking on the phone in general.
Yeah, let me interject something real quickly there, because one of the things on this program, I've had the opportunity to speak to many brain neuroscientists, and I've had this conversation with them. We are not capable of multitasking. The brain can only focus on one thing at a time. We can go back and forth, but it's just not possible, and I wanted to throw that in there.
Absolutely. And, while we're talking about the brain briefly, I'll interject here that the whole concept with young drivers, the frontal lobe development, and the reason why some of these things happen with young drivers is their reasoning skills just aren't there. I referenced their invincibility, and
that's true too.
It's about the mid-20s before that fully develops.
The brain doesn't fully develop until 21.
Yeah, and my wife is hoping mine's going to kick in one of these days. But, with so many of these kids, society's not going to wait until mid-20s to have these guys get their license. So we get them into vehicles, and we want to train them and give them skills to keep themselves out of trouble. Are they going to do some dumb things along the way? Probably. We're going to try to scare them into wearing their seatbelt. We're going to, one of the things that happens in our slalom drill is that they'll lose control of the car at probably 33, 34 miles per hour, and there's a conversation that goes on in the vehicle about how that just happened at such a slow speed. And what business do they have doing 40, 50, 60 miles an hour on some of these back roads? And the look on not just a teen, again, parents, how often are these kids have been watching them for at least the last 15 years after that baby seat got spun around the other direction. And that influence they have on their driving is pretty dramatic.
Again, Dan Strollo, president of In Control Crash Prevention Training here on Common Ground at 100.7 WZLX. The website is driveincontrol.com. All right, we have a few minutes left here, and at this point, I would like to mention real quickly that a lot of insurance companies actually offer discounts for people who've gone through this this program, correct?
Correct. Both personally, and we've got a number of companies that are starting to offer special deals for commercial drivers. What I would say is for new drivers, it's about 85% of the market, and it seems to be adding every month or so. There's a change in the way the insurance regulations in Massachusetts works, so that now these insurance companies can kind of add their own discounts if they want to. And so about 85% of the market out there, teens can get a discount between 5 and 10%. And unfortunately, if you put a teen on your car, I mean, you're talking a couple $1,000s a year just to get the standard coverages. So our course can easily be paid for inside of the first 2 years. With normal drivers, somebody with more experience behind the wheel, about half the market offers a discount between 5 and 10% right now. Many companies are helping subsidize the training. Safety insurance is one that we had talked about earlier, where they actually will reduce the cost of the training down to $75, and they pay the balance to us, and then that person actually will get 5% off their insurance on top of it. So it's really important. Check with your agent. We work with a lot of insurance agencies, again, with both their commercial and personal lines folks, and we, we'll just get information to them about our program, or sometimes they host programs for their clients. Check with your insurance agent, and if they don't have the answer for you, certainly call us, and we'd be happy to educate them ourselves.
I'd like to mention the cost of the program because I think that it's important and it's money well spent since I've known about this program, and now even more so that I've actually gone through it. I was waiting for my oldest daughter to get to the point where take her through it and go with her through it. It was $299
Correct.
for the first.
It's $299 for the first member of a family, and then we take $99 off, so any additional family member is $200. And we do payment plans as well. We have, occasionally we'll get somebody who that's just not something they can afford to do, and you can literally pay $24.99 per month to us, get your insurance discount the next day, and just keep paying us along the way. And we've had teens who are actually saving more money than it costs them to do the training.
Okay. And then you also offer, if parents don't want to go through the training themselves, they can actually observe, which they're going to get all of the verbal information, which is fabulous. So
absolutely. They can observe for free. There's no cost for that. Frequently what happens is they call us Monday wanting to sign themselves up with their kids not around, and we understand the reasoning for that. And it is one of those things where once you've seen it, it clicks. So we've even had parents come, and they're not sure when they can get their kids in, but they want to come and observe on a separate date, and we'll work that out for them as well.
Okay. So I highly recommend that.
And I should mention one other thing about teens. The appropriate time, or the best time for us to see a teen, is just before they got their license. We can work with teens still on their permit. We don't want to see them the day after they receive their permit from the registry. The goal is that they do some driving with the family, preferably do most of their driver's ed hours, and come see us in that month or two just before they're going to go for their license exam. That said, we've trained about 16,000 students. There's 50,000 plus getting their license every year. So we would much prefer to see everybody. And so if you've got your license already, and you could be 25, 40, 60, 94 years old, and if you haven't had our training, we would really like to see you go through the program.
Okay. And you say that some people don't pass. How is that?
A couple summers ago, there were a lot of senior crashes, mature drivers. There probably wasn't any more than we normally see, but it was a big item in the news. And so until then, we probably only had a couple dozen students fail. And failure typically means they just could not handle a particular drill. They couldn't get down the concept of slamming on the brakes. Or in those cases, prior to working with all the older drivers, it was primarily students who got their permit. Their parents were very excited to work with us and signed them up way too early. Sometimes they get their permit on Friday and come see us Saturday. And it was just, that's not what we're there for. We can't handle a lot of the basic introduction. And driver's ed does a very good job with the traditional getting him up to speed. We've since had a lot of older drivers fail the program. Some of them have literally called me or spoken to us at the class and said they're not going to drive anymore. They recognized that they didn't have the capacity to.
That's a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, and what's frequently happened is parents of teens have either observed or heard about us and thought about their own parents. and said, this is something I want to talk to my mom about or my dad. And we really have gotten a lot of positive feedback. We've worked with a number of senior centers and different councils on aging and had them bring groups of people through the program. But, our failure numbers have gone up. And what we do is if someone does fail, regardless of age, we let them take the class again, or we work with them on a private lesson. There's no charge for that. That's a part of the program, and it's built in.
Thank you for bringing up the elderly drivers, because that was one of the things that I had talked about. So it's recommended, and you can get a good sense of whether it is wise to be behind the wheel or not.
Absolutely. It's a real tough thing to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And we've talked with a lot of the legislators about, the concept of testing. If you and I went and took a license test right now, there's a good chance we would fail. I mean, it's complicated, the driving, the expectations of where they expect you to stop and how you're supposed to handle, a three-point turn and different things like that. It's not necessarily fair without some training to have people be expected to take tests. And so we're first and foremost, let's train them how not to crash. And our experience has been the realization. I mean, we mentioned the 3 seconds. When we do that tailgating drill, we had a few students where they passed the vehicle and went another 2 or 3 seconds before they applied their brakes.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation inside the vehicle was that, not only would they be dead and the people they hit would be dead, but probably a few other innocent bystanders, walking down the road. It was just that sort of catastrophic thing. And we weren't going that fast. At the end of the day, when you think about, a lot of the excuses for some of the senior drivers is they're staying close to home, and, this crash would have happened at 40 miles an hour.
Okay, excellent. At this point, Dan, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to interject?
No, I think, you've done a great job. Again, as somebody who's been through it, I think you recognize what we try to do. It is something that I can say we did not invent this program. We're very proud. This is the only program in the United States that's state certified. A couple years ago, we were able to work with the Registry of Motor Vehicles in Massachusetts, and it's a program that's state certified, and that's what's led to a lot of the insurance discounts. There's only 2 companies. There's a couple of state troopers out in Western Mass, and then ourselves in Eastern Mass that provide this program, and that's how you can take advantage of insurance discounts. So we're very proud of it, and for anybody that has questions or wants us to work with their school system or their company, we invite them to visit our website or give us a call. Our 800 number is 888-301-SAFE.
I also want to state this real quickly. This station doesn't just cover Massachusetts, and maybe you don't get a discount on your insurance in other states. However,
what's neat is in most other states there are discounts already because we qualify as a defensive driving program.
You do, okay.
And if you live in New Hampshire, we have special deals for teens in New Hampshire because there's a Lovering Family Foundation up there, helps subsidize training for them. And really, call us up if money is a problem. We'll figure out something to help somebody out. I mean, we're really in this because we're passionate about saving lives.
Excellent. Me too. Well, thank you so much, Dan. Keep up the great work, and this was fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So please do check out driveincontrol.com. I feel that driving is one of the most dangerous things that we all do. It's the top of the charts for teenagers, so please protect your teenager and yourself. Check out incontrol.com for In Control crash prevention training. Again, thank you to Dan Strollo, president of In Control, and also thank you to Safety Insurance. My name is Kimberly, and if you would like more details about anything that happens on Common Ground, please do get in contact with me through email. My email address is commonground@wzlx.com, and if you'd like a copy of this interview to share with others, please contact me, and I'll send you a link to a copy, whatever. And that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll do it again next week. Have a good one. This is 100.7 WZLX.